Hello, everybody. I'm out for a walk on a rather breezy day, so probably get a little bit of wind noise on the mic from time to time, but I've checked in and made a recording in the wind to see about how loud it is, and I think it's probably something we can live with. But my apologies if you find it distracting or disturbing. It's nice when there's no extraneous sounds, but we live in a world where there's lots of extraneous things going on, or fundamental things like the breeze. And perhaps the breeze is appropriate to my topic today. Breezes are often associated with spirit, and thus we have the word inspiration. Which both means to feel excited and aroused and motivated, and also means to breathe in. The associations of this word are deep and rich and ancient, and take into their compass the fact of our breathing and its fundamental relationship with being. Wind, we draw wind in, we make inward wind, and then we express outward wind. And on a cold day, you'll see the changing cloud, swirling cloud of mist and steam that comes out from our lungs. Today I was listening to Tim Ferriss talking with Swami I listen to a lot these days, whose name I cannot remember yet. He's part of the Ramakrishna order, and I love his podcasts. They're great. And the two topics that I want to explore today are consciousness and the divine being, the being ordinarily referred to as God. Here's a very old bell. It's like a cowbell or something. Has a nice tone. So, in modern neuroscience, there's a continuum of positions, but science in general presents and authorizes a reductionist, materialistic perspective. This is natural to this way of knowing, and it's very powerful, particularly in producing insights about the world of transactional reality, or the material world as we think of it. It's funny, there's a beautiful lake here. There's actually a few of them around here, and I know these lakes well. I grew up around them, but they are completely fenced off. They are private lakes. There is no way for any person to get to the water. Cannot be done. Of course, in theory, one could climb the fences, but even then, one would have access only to a very, very tiny portion of the lake, because the lakes are surrounded with houses. And I love these lakes, and I'd like to go to them and be on them in a boat, or swim in them, or, well, when I was younger, I would fish in them. I don't think I could fish now. I'm a very skillful fisherman, but I don't think I could hurt the beings, the worms and the fishes and such. And some people will say, oh, you're a hypocrite, you eat meat, but you don't kill the meat, so, you know. This is a very abstract concern from one perspective, and a realistic concern from another. I think the reason I bring up the lake and the fences is partly because it's right here in my experience right now. But it's an excellent analogy of our modern relationship with both the divine world, or the origin world as I like to call it, and also with consciousness. There's been a bunch of structure that's erected all around these ideas, and the structure doesn't let us swim. We can't go to the water because the structure creates a barrier between us and the water in thought. And in this analogy, the water is our original nature, our true nature, which is discoverable to us, but very peculiarly occluded, very effectively occluded. If we could figure out how to jump the fence and go for a swim in our original nature, what excellent and beautiful bliss would be ours for ever thereafter. But even if we are aware of this, the occlusions are so trenchant that most of us will find it very challenging unless we are naturally gifted or inclined to this endeavor. In a sense, what we refer to as consciousness, or what I will refer to as consciousness in this discussion, and I'll try to make clear what it is I'm speaking of there, and what I am referring to as the direct experience of divinity or the divine. The divine itself, but also most often we will experience a layer of it if we have some experience. There was, I think, a brain surgeon, perhaps his name will come to me, who wrote a book, Proof of Heaven, because he had the experience of being clinically dead. And during that experience, well, of course, he had some experience when supposedly his brain was dead. Now, neuroscientists and others will argue, I received a phone call which broke my train of thought. Let's see if I can retrieve it. So, the surgeon or neurologist guy, he had some experience, and scientists will try to explain this away in various ways. And there's lots of ways to do that. We can say that that the temporality of his experience is confused, so that he actually had this experience before he died, clinically, his brain was dead. Now, of course, what they mean by dead is there's no electrical activity in the brain. And he had a very catastrophic brain infection. And in fact, there's no reasonable way that we can understand in modern medical science for why he could survive this, or even survive it and return to normal function as a human being, quote unquote, normal function. And I think his name is Eben Alexander, if I'm remembering right. And he came back and wrote a book about heaven and made the claim that, and this is a truth claim, that because he had experience while he was dead, this proves that there's an afterlife. There's a couple of problems here. The first is, of course, he had some kind of an experience and he has memories of this experience, and then he narratizes these memories, he makes a narrative out of them, and decides what they mean and what the experiences are, their ontological nature, and so on, and how he knows what they are, the epistemology, and so on. And I'm not here to deny his experience or even really his interpretation, but I would ask that we admit together that it's an interpretation, and that after the experience, post hoc, he created a narrative for a specific array of purposes. Obviously, he was inspired, by his experience. But he nonetheless interpreted it for specific purposes, and including the writing of books and such. Now, I too have profound non-ordinary experience. I have tried to resist the urge to specifically narratize it. So if someone says to me, "Do you know exactly what happened to you?" I will say, "No, I do not know." I can say what I think it was like, and I have narratives and ideas about it, but I don't reify them explicitly the way that Eben did, and continues to do. And obviously, Eben thinks there's some great benefit, if we believe him, that we will be enlightened and educated and relieved of wrong-minded ideas and so forth. And I too have similar beliefs about my experiences. I think the thing that's important to understand is that it's very difficult for humans to resist the urge to narratize experience post hoc. And that presents a bunch of problems. Now, if someone asks me the question of, what do I think happens when we die? Well, this is a peculiarly troublesome question, because in our ordinary ways of thinking, we are inclined to think in a very clumsy way, a way that proposes either this or that happens, and the same thing happens for everyone. This is not like our actual experience or nature. Let me be very clear. Think about the fact that each one of us has been born. We developed in the womb of our mother after she was fertilized by our father, or at least some sperm. And then we had a very specific and unique experience inside the womb developmentally, just as each one of our mothers is in a unique situation in her life and health and relationships. So we had a very unique experience in the womb, and then we emerged from the womb each one of us with a specific family, born into specific cultures, epochs of modernity or the past, and then we developed. And so what I mean to say here is that it is a fact that we all underwent development and birth, but it is a wildly different result of that process for each one of us. Now, this isn't to say that some of our lives, there are resemblances in our experience of having been born and developing as a child and becoming adults and so on. There are features that are shared that we can generally say are true of all of us. For example, we eat food, we learn language. But we each have a unique relationship with food and language. And even though there are many shared things, there are probably vastly more unique things. And certainly we can imagine that it's very different to be born to a family of slaves somewhere in who knows where, Syria or India somewhere, than it is to be born to a wealthy and privileged family somewhere. We are each born with unique gifts and vulnerabilities. And so, although we undergo the same experience of birth and we are all alive in a general sense, if we look very closely, we will find that this is profoundly unique for each person. The fact that we all have the experience of birth does not reduce being born to the same thing for all people. It turns out that being born initiates a human lifetime. And each human lifetime and each person's life experience is probably far more unique than it is similar to those of other people. So when we ask a question like, what happens after death? The question, what happens after birth, is an important and enlightening question that we have actual direct experience of. We each have a unique experience of something that happened after birth, or all the things that happened after birth. And so we must imagine, some humans are born and they have no hands. Some humans are born and they have no eyes. Some humans are born and they cannot form a coherent mind as we understand it. Some humans are born and become incredibly athletic. Some humans are born and become great prodigies or artists. Some humans overcome what we think of as developmental challenges. And some humans don't. So there's an infinite array of possibilities that begin with birth. And similarly, we must imagine that if anything happens after death, it is probably at least as unique to each being as it is generally the same. It probably resembles birth in both that there are generalized shared aspects of whatever may happen, and then there are unique, what we might think of as personal aspects, although it's unclear that the experience of being post-death of the body is a personal experience, since the word personal applies to those of us who have been born. We might say that there's a shared domain of transpersonal experience after death, if we decide that anything happens at all. Now, of course, there are two fundamental positions. One is, death is the absolute end of all things There's nothing after it. Just, it's pretty hard to imagine nothing, by the way. Try it sometime. See how difficult it is. But this is one of the positions, that everything about my consciousness, being, awareness, soul, and so on ends there, at the moment of death. Now, of course, death is not really a moment. Death is a process, and it's a complex, long process, very poorly understood by humans, which is part of why Eben's experience is confusing both to him and other people, especially doctors. How could he have large portions of his brain eaten away by bacteria and then, essentially wake up with reports of having been to heaven, quote unquote, that's his narrative, and then relatively quickly return to what appears to pretty much everyone as normal human function? Should be impossible if our understanding of the brain and so on, our clinical understanding, it's not our understanding, it's clinical understanding, is correct. And once again, we have the same problem here of generalizing something that's extremely unique in each instance, a brain. Yes, probabilistically, it's very unlikely that this would happen to someone, that they could have an experience like this, and that they could return to normal function, and so on. But it happened. And this is part of the problem with generalized knowledge. Generalized knowledge accounts for probabilities over cohorts. Any specific individual, quote unquote, is a unique instance. And so things that seem impossible when we look at the overall picture are not only possible, they are actual in specific instances. Someone lives to be 130. Nobody lives to be 130. Wrong. Someone does. So the two basic positions are, there's some continuity of being post-death of the body, which again is not just the cessation of the heartbeat, cessation of brain signals. People return to life after both of those things with some degree of regularity, meaning not zero people return. And I've wandered a bit afield here, but I've done so with a purpose in mind. So one of the things that happened for Eben is he got to swim in the ocean. Right? He got through the barriers. With his body essentially dead, something we might call his consciousness had a profound, non-ordinary experience. And then, when he returned to waking consciousness from this experience, he could recall what had happened, albeit selectively, and then narratize it and present us with a story of what happened. Probably the difference between me and him is he believes his story. I'm more inclined to believe his experience and be a little bit suspicious of his narratization. Similarly, the story we tell about a dream is not a dream. Dreaming is a profoundly non-ordinary event that usually happens when we're asleep, though there are probably hundreds of forms of dreaming, many of which used to happen regularly when we were awake. There's going to be a little wind noise for a bit here as I go down and visit the water in the San Joaquin Delta. So this is one place where, even though there's a lot of fences, I can get down near the water. And that seems like a good idea given the topic at hand. And the fact that I adore the water. So Eben broke through all the fences and structure by dying. There's other ways to break through it, or even to render the structure and fences partly permeable. I am most fond of experiences that do not involve or require the use of intoxicants, though I will mention that psychedelics are one of the methods of rendering some of the structure permeable. I'm going to pause now because of how much wind there is, and I'll come back in a moment. So I tend to prefer inductions to ecstasy and non-ordinary experience that do not involve intoxicants for a wide variety of reasons. And most of the people who've listened to my talks are aware of this peculiarity. There's lots of dangers, particularly for moderns, because we don't have intelligent ancient cultures that would encompass these experiences and provide wise context. Nonetheless, it seems reasonably true that certain kinds of psychedelic drugs soften some of the barriers between us and the great waters of being and wisdom and insight, awakening, liberation. And often this is accomplished simply by inhibiting things that are ordinarily very powerful features of our waking world consciousness. I think neuroscientists, if I remember the research correctly, were surprised to discover that people under the influence of psychedelic mushrooms, rather than having wild activation of various brain areas, experienced unexpected inhibition of certain brain areas. In any case, there are infinite ways to soften the barrier between us and the great waters. Meditation of various kinds is well known to be effective at accomplishing this. And rhythmic input is very powerful. I was just standing on a dock in the water, and the dock was rocking with the waves. And that by itself is a very powerful induction. It is possible that certain forms of hypnotic induction can be useful in this. But fundamentally, for most of human history, non-ordinary experience was catalyzed by one of a fairly small number of participatory experiences. Experiences where there is profound passion, longing, need, or desire. Some experiences of crisis, but particularly experiences in which groups of humans who are intimately related to each other, tribally, as families, and so on, got together and danced and drummed and rattled and sang and screamed. These kinds of things, these are probably the most ancient group inductions for humans. It seems clear also that animals undergo various forms of trance. And some forms of trance render barriers more permeable. Almost lost my hat right there. And in a way, we can think of having the experience of the barriers becoming permeable, a bit like losing a hat. There's something on top of our consciousness that continually inhibits our access to the great waters of being, the great waters of origin. And there are certain kinds of experiences that suddenly remove the barriers for us. Hi. A deep experience of the friendliness of strangers is one of those experiences. Some of the barrier is removed. Now, of course, fundamentally, it's my understanding and experience that all beings and places are one being. It's just that this is hidden from us. And beings who have lived before us are still beings, and beings who will live after us are already beings. The way the universe is, or the great everything is so astonishing and unlike what we would imagine with our common waking consciousness, that when confronted with it, there's a risk of death from beauty. In Christianity, the phrase, the fear of God, is commonly offered or spoken or written. And in general, I think many people are inclined to interpret this phrase to mean that God is terrible and wrathful and judgmental and so on. Whatever God may be, I think the reality is quite the opposite of that. It's a great and terrifying ecstatic beauty. A beauty so astonishing that our individuality, and probably our bodies, can survive nothing more than the very least of exposures to it. It's a beauty so vast and astonishing that were we exposed to more than just the tiniest glimpse, we would expire of ecstasy. Now, I'm not trying to convince anyone of anything here. I don't want to convince people that my experience is real, or Evan's is real, or what the scientists say is real. And these are different kinds of reality. Pedagogical reality, scientific reality, clinical reality. This is a very different thing from what we might call the transcendental fact of original nature or originary participation in existence. Questions about God are very difficult to shed light on in ordinary language and thought. We need forms of language, neologisms, specific ways of speaking, analogies, parables, metaphors, and so on, that can point toward the nature of the divine without collapsing it into deliverable terms and functions and so on. Thus we have the term transcendental. All of that which is meta to all of that we are familiar with. Beyond that with which we are ordinarily familiar. But perhaps directly involved in our capacity to have awareness or understanding at all. So when I use the word God, I mean a being, in this conversation, I mean a being who, a transcendental being, a non-ordinary being, outside of time, outside of matter, who is the source of all beings, and in whom all beings both originate and exist, probably eternally, but when you're outside of time, the meaning of eternity is not the same as the meaning of forever. So I think of this as the being who dwells in unity. The living communion of all beings and all that is beyond all beings. I try not to ascribe qualities. Nonetheless, I have some direct experience of that of which I speak, or the one of which I speak. And I have narratives and models and fairy tales and so on. It's not my intention to present those here. Those are the result both of long, passionate seeking and also of eventual partial success in this seeking. And so an experienced introduction to the world of origin, or the place of origin, or the origin being. Now, what other people mean by God depends on who's speaking and why and where and how and so forth. Though the term generally points in the same direction, the distinctions are profuse, and some of them are absurd and impossible, or at least they seem impossible. Now, it's certainly reasonable to suppose or imagine that there are something like sub-gods, godlets, or angels, or organs of the being who dwells in unity, that have specific purviews over aspects of the everything and beings. And I think in this way, and this also matches my experience. But I'm very cautious to reify any of these thoughts and say, no, this is how it is. These are essays, they are attempts at pointing towards something completely transcendental to language and concept, much like a kiss. A passionate, involved kiss is a departure from just about everything else. Right? And there is no way to encompass it in language, though we might try to compare it to things, or make descriptions of it, or so on. Much like a dream, those descriptions are not dreaming. If we could actually describe dreaming, we would begin dreaming. And if we could properly invoke a dream, then we would redream the dream we were invoking. This would be an experience of dreaming, not an experience of description, or storytelling, or narratives. And thus it is when we emerge from a dream with memories and we translate those memories into narratives, this is not the dream. This is not dreaming. It's not even really a record of the dream. It's a record of waking mind, sort of mostly left hemispheric-ish mind, translating things of which it has no real experience and very little relation with into the stuff it's used to, which is graspable concepts, narratives, plots, and so on. This is what Eben did with his experience. And it's similar to what I myself have done with my experience or experiences. Although, in my case, I always give the proviso, that what I'm saying is not the experience. And these are toys of reference that I've composed to attempt to talk meaningfully about something that really does not fit in language very well at all. Although parts of it fit into parables and analogies and metaphors and so on. Whatever God is or may be, it appears there's something beyond even that. Something so transcendental that all qualities, disappear. And this is what is often referred to in Buddhist and Vedantic traditions with the word emptiness. Of this, I intend to say very little, for putting hats on hatlessness is not my goal. However, I will say that it, in my view, at present, it more resembles absolute, undifferentiated potential, the before of all beingness, than it does emptiness. Very difficult for us to understand emptiness. And if I say this emptiness is dynamic, which is my experience, I've already begun making mistakes that will lead to catastrophe. So it's best for me to not speak too much about this, except to say that it is certainly not merely nothing. And that there is a quality, no, that's not the right word. Perhaps, no. Every time I try to make a word, I'm going to fail, but I'll keep goofing around here for a minute. It's as if there's a dynamism in this emptiness, and it's as if, though exceeding all qualities, the emptiness has a certain kind of character to it, or a potential character, a potency. There we go, a potency. That's what I'm looking for. Or perhaps infinite potencies. It's my experience that all beings and forms are reflections of potencies in the being that dwells in unity. And so the face of the raccoon, the shape of the tree, the shape of my hand, the wondrous transcendental beauty of the eyes of animals and humans, all that is attractive and all that is repulsive, all of these things are not precisely reflections. They are what shall I call them? It's difficult. They are resemblances and appearances appearances of the nature of the marriage of the being who dwells in unity with the living waters, with time, space, and matter. And all of the things the humans make actually have qualities that are derived from features of what I think of in my private world as the universe of origin. Wheels and rods and keys and locks and rings and discs and spheres and all of the geometric forms and so on. I'm in a place of a lot of wind, so we might say I'm very inspired right now. So I want to shift now toward talking about consciousness, awareness. And I guess I'll start by talking a little bit about what I mean by the use of these words. And here is some tricky ground to traverse. Consciousness is that by which anything is revealed. The analogy is light, in the sense of seeing. With zero light, there is no seeing. With zero consciousness, nothing is revealed. And there is nothing to reveal it to. Consciousness and awareness are primordial. They come before all ideas and concepts. Without them, there are no ideas or concepts. There are no minds. And all of the entire lexicon of things that humans have made words to point to dissolves. Now, this is a peculiar thing because if I refer to the sun, I'm a human being referring to the sun. If all the humans were to disappear suddenly, or if they were to be somehow rendered never having existed, then there is no such thing as the sun. Because the humans have human concepts and words to point at stuff. So when I say the sun, I'm using the human ideas and concepts and words to point at a phenomenon that we can experience directly as humans. But if there are no humans, there's nothing like the human idea of the sun. There might be something there, but there's no one to comment on it, therefore there is nothing to be said. Of course, we could imagine that if just the humans disappeared, then all the other organisms would still have experience of the sun. But that would not be the human idea or experience of the sun. So again, we're left with the same problem. There's something going on, but we cannot say anything about it because all human ideas and concepts have disappeared with humans. And this is very important. It's not just a merely didactic point. When we use human language, and a specific human language like English, then what we're doing is participating in a tradition of knowledge and reference. Whatever's actually going on is far beyond that tradition and cannot be encompassed by any of the traditions or even by their sum. What is actually going on is transcendental to knowledge and language, description, analysis, evaluation. And this is where science runs into a variety of problems. I was laughing earlier, listening to Tim Ferriss talking to Swamiji, and I think he was repeating something Ken Wilber said about reductionists and reductionist materialist paradigms like those common in science. And he said, let's see if I can remember. Apparently for the reductionists, everything can be explained by the idea of frisky dirt. Now, of course, this also fails because if they had just said everything is simply dirt, then they'd be close to success. But the problem here is they have to explain why the dirt is frisky. Why is there friskiness associated with dirt? What is that frisky thing? And of course, what they mean is something like unpredictably, erotically self-fascinated particles. But where do you get the eros? See, this is the problem. There's a number of movements within neuroscience and other sciences whose goal it is to dismiss everything that cannot be clinically grasped and evict it from the subjective world of experience by calling it an epiphenomenon. So you don't have consciousness. Consciousness is just an illusion. It's like the exhaust produced by the functioning of your brain or something like this, which is ridiculous because there are no brains in boxes. All brains are full bodies. Your nervous system is all throughout your body. It relates with every aspect of your body. So the idea that it's all in your head is some kind of catastrophic confusion. Philosophically, this goal belongs to a school called eliminative materialism. And what is being eliminated is anything outside the mechanics that we can get a grasp on. Everything transcendental is to be eliminated. It's kind of a weird idea. In fact, it's a catastrophically dumb idea. Though it's useful, right? We need people to make these kinds of arguments in order for us to understand why they fail. And the basic feature of their failing is relatively easy to get a hold of. Without consciousness, you don't have the concern of eliminating anything. It's consciousness that gives you the questions that lead to the desire for this elimination and the functional arguments for it, however crude or impossible they may be. So to try to throw consciousness away and say, no, since we can't explain that, obviously it is that with which we have the desire for explanation. Without consciousness, without awareness, none of these questions or concerns could arise. So it's ironic, in fact it's recursively ironic, that consciousness would result in a school of thought that attempts to eliminate it as a subject of concern, or wonder, or fascination, or curiosity. Dawkins and Dennett and Hitchens, Harris, those are the four horsemen. These are eliminative materialists. And it's sort of ironic that they would attack theists, though again it makes some sense because of their concerns.
Hello, sweetness. Yes. Hello.
The cat has come to visit me. And it just came running like we were old friends.
Hi. My beauty. Yeah. Hi, sweetness.
Had no fear. It just ran right up to me and wanted to say hello.
What a beautiful soul you are. Yes. Yes. I love you. Yes, I do. I love you. Yes. Yes.
How did it know? How did this cat know that we could be companions, that we could be friends? It doesn't seem to be a young cat, and I'm going to guess it's a female. I like to think that it's very sensitive, like me. I don't think the cat is a machine. The cat is a soul, an embodied soul. And it senses, just as I sense, that fundamentally we are together in the world.
Yes. Yes, hi, beauty.
And so we can have an experience of being together in the world in seemingly separate bodies that recalls the great communion of all beings. And so softens the barriers between us and the great waters. Communion and love and mutual concern, adoration, glory, sweetness. I hope this cat isn't lost. Sometimes when cats are lost, then they
Yes.
and they're much more demonstrative of friendliness. But it seems that this cat lives here. I just can't tell for sure. Yeah, it's a little bit skittish, and that makes me concerned that it's lost. But I'm hoping that it lives right near one of these houses. We'll see for how long it follows me. It seems to want to hang out around where I first encountered it. So that's a modestly good sign. I don't want to be too forward and go knocking on doors. But of course I want the cat to be safe because I already love it. So isn't it ironic that the very consciousness with which we form questions and concerns about nature and identity and the fundamental reality of stuff, I don't want to use the word things, could mount an assault on its own root. Now, there's at least three important ways to think about consciousness. Things are revealed in consciousness, things are revealed as consciousness, and then finally, consciousness is the fundamental ground of all experience and being. The light of lights, the source of sources, the heart of hearts. Is consciousness in us, or are we consciousness? experiencing the revelation of consciousness as being. Primarily, it was my goal to refute the eliminative materialists briefly and call their agenda absurd. However, again, I'm really grateful that they exist. Without them, I might be deceived into thinking something like, oh, there's not really any such thing as consciousness. This is all just a vast mechanical accident. My mind is an epiphenomenon of the function of my body that ceases entirely when my body dies. And things like this, ideas like this. None of which I believe. It seems wildly unlikely to me that the death of my body will be the end of it will be the end of the participation of Darren, my embodied self, in awareness, probably, in waking, embodied, material world awareness. And I don't know precisely what happens after that. But I have every reason to suspect, believe, and know that the end of my body is not the end of the processes and intelligences and histories and futures from which I emerged into embodiment. I do consider it a mystery. I don't claim to know what the truth is. And in fact, unless we have an experience of it, it's just speculation. Or it's mostly speculation with some intuition involved. When I had a chance to gaze into the great mystery of being, and have the great mystery of being gaze into me, and walk hand in hand in wonder and adoration and awe, my primary concerns were not about death and the continuity of my being. They were about life and healing the damage in the minds of our species on Earth, so that we could not be in such terrible traps of language and concept and ideology and I wanted to render the barriers permeable again, so that we could all go to the great water at will and remember ourselves and our origin and our fundamental communion, our intimacy, not just with humans but with all beings in all of time. The great waters exclude no one and nothing. They don't even exclude nothing. It seems to me that consciousness is a result of participation in the hyperstructure of all beings in all of time, and the being who dwells in unity, and perhaps particular organs, so to speak, in that being. There seems to be an aspect of the being that dwells in unity that not only gives rise to minds in animals and humans, and perhaps other life forms, or mind-like processes, it participates directly in those processes, or they participate directly in those processes. And so our mind right now is inseparable from the divine beings. They are participating in it directly, moment to moment, and without that participation, we would not have minds. We can become aware of this. It's very uncommon. Many of us suspect something like this, but have no or little direct experience of it. And some of us are passionately seeking such experience so that we can understand. one of the peculiar ironies of human thinking, and particularly linguistic thought, is that understanding is rare and overstanding is common. And this is what's going on when the eliminative materialists say there's no such thing as consciousness or awareness. Those are just figments of your imagination, things you've made up words about, that are actually just the result of the mechanical processes of your biological vehicle, or the biological vehicle. And thus they would say, in the shadow version of the Enlightenment language, there is no you. But they mean a very different thing. They don't mean you are the transcendental origin. You are that origin right now. They don't mean that. They mean you're just a figment. Both schools of thought would agree that you, or me, is a figment. The Buddhists and Vedantists would compare this figment to a kind of dreaming. You're having a dream of a separate self. The scientists would say there's no basis for believing in a you. Well, some scientists would say this. Some philosophers would say the idea of you is just a delusion. But there's a difference between a dream and a delusion here. They're not exactly the same thing. When we're stuck in language, we're farther from the truth. It's so hard to get closer to the truth by using words. What we need is a direct experience of our true nature, origin, the great communion, the great waters of being. And water is probably the best metaphor, so that's why I keep using it. When I speak and make these recordings, I'm making an attempt. And I'm also trying to understand my own thought and capacities for articulation better. I succeed to various degrees against my own standards. I made a recording last night that I'm not very happy with and I'm not sure I'll post. And in this recording, I'm not particularly pleased with the results either. But it's my goal to explore, and when I'm exploring, it's a bit like wandering around in a forest. There are moments of profound success where I feel, yes, this is what I was looking for. This stone with the tree sticking out of it here on the side of this mountain where I can see the vistas and the birds. This is what I was after. And there are other moments where I'm just trying to figure out how to get somewhere. And consciousness is like this for most of us much of the time. Frisky dirt. It's hilarious. I agree that the dirt is frisky, but I don't think it's just mechanical dirt. We talk about the laws of the universe as if there's some lawgiver, but whatever's going on in the universe isn't laws. Laws are a human idea. And they're not rules either, because rules are human ideas. And whatever's going on out there transcendentally, I think we, as human beings, academically, particularly clinically and scientifically, our understanding is catastrophically misfounded because we don't know the first thing about anything. We don't know the most important thing to know before you start making further cuts in the manifold of identity. And if we knew that, if we could get a hold of that, What is the most important starting place, the best first move, a truly trustworthy first move? Then we could make progress. But without knowing that, and we don't, science certainly can't find this, we're going to be trapped by our purposes in making cuts. And in a way, we will get further and further from the truth rather than closer and closer to it. Obviously, our species is catastrophically confused because most of what we do is a consistently aggravated, self-expanding assault on the nature of life on Earth. That's not the activity of an enlightened species. That's the activity of a catastrophically confused species. They're attacking their own origin most of the time and finding new ways to do that all day, every day. That game will fail. And it's not even really a game, it's a disease. But there is hope. Some of the ancient traditions are brilliant. There are profoundly altruistic, wise human beings walking around. Some of them are little children, some of them are old people, some of them are young people, middle-aged people. In every culture and walk of life we find reason for hope. And we can become that hope, and perhaps that was my primary concern when I was walking in and with the great waters of being during my experiences. May we render the barriers permeable together in ways that are wise, kind, friendly, and intelligent. Thank you for joining me. I look forward to learning together again very soon.